And my colleague Jyotsna Kumar is still with us. Jyotsna, we were talking about the condition at this moment in Caracas. You know, looking at these images, these attacks would have come as a complete surprise for the people in Venezuela. One was expecting that there would be some kind of a attack that the Venezuelans could expect. But to carry out an attack of this scale, tell us what the situation is like in Caracas from the report that you're picking up.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, of course, it's a surprise for the civilians, of course, but maybe not for Maduro. Of course, he was hoping for negotiation talks with Donald Trump. But after these explosions, clearly we see a state of emergency there. People were seen rushing out. We saw explosions, the night sky being, lighted up with these explosions. What we know is that the U.S. Embassy in Bogota has now issued a shelter-in-place warning for citizens in Venezuela due to the ongoing strikes. So this is the latest that we know. We don't know. This is probably just the first U.S. reaction that we can probably say so. We have the U.S. Embassy that has come out with saying U.S. Embassy Bogota is aware of reports of explosions in and around Caracas, Venezuela. The U.S. Embassy in Bogota in Colombia warns U.S. citizens not to travel to Venezuela. This is the first reaction we're getting from. Of course, we have Venezuela has the highest travel advisory level that we know. So these are the first reactions coming in from. We have reactions from Gustavo Petro from Colombia, from Cuba, who have been calling out and calling these attacks as unprecedented, and of course asking for international reactions. And it's interesting to know how Maduro has been talking about these regime change. And just interesting, before in 31st of December, we had Mercado just coming out with a statement saying that 2026 will be the year of the consolidation of our nation's freedom. And as you had mentioned, she, of course, had been given the Nobel Peace Prize, which Trump was also vouching for, we would say. But then Mercado went on and shared it with Trump. It's very interesting to see if this actually is it a regime change, or is it an attack on narcotics, or is it an attack on oil reserves, which is interesting because, of course, world's largest oil reserves we see in Venezuela. So, of course, it's interesting to see all these reactions coming in. For now, the residents in Venezuela, of course, are without electricity and, of course, going into shelters to protect themselves in a state of emergency in Venezuela, Saleh.
Interesting. Jyotsna, do continue to stay on with this. Professor Deason, if I can bring you in on this. You know, when the United States started seizing these Venezuelan oil tankers at a time when they were completely loaded, a lot of people said that the Americans have got Venezuela's and Nicolas Maduro's Achilles heel. And if the Americans were to go on and seize enough of these Venezuelan oil tankers, that would effectively result in the Venezuelans not having enough money to run the administration. Do you think that Donald Trump has now taken this option of going in with an active war rather than trying to seize Venezuelan tankers? Why do you think he has changed his strategy there?
Well, I don't have a window into his head, but I think seizing or taking the assets of Venezuela, I think that it wouldn't necessarily be an end in itself. I think the main objective is to starve Venezuela of its main income, to create social and political instability, again in the hope of achieving a regime change. But it's quite possible that with the very blatant aggression like this, that there would simply be greater support for the Venezuelan government. But I also thought that the United States could have gone for this option that is just slowly bleeding Venezuela of its income, as opposed to which would have had less repercussions domestically within the United States, but also the reactions abroad. But again, it seems like a major war is what they're going for. It might not be a major war. It could be something that Trump did with Iran as well, just to do a couple of days and hope to get it done with, somewhat quickly. And then, as I said
but
before,
in the case of Iran, Professor Deason, in the case of Iran, some would say that he was dragged into the Iran war when he really did not want to go and stage those attacks on the Iranian nuclear sites. But he was dragged into the war unwillingly by the Israelis, who got involved and attacked first. But in this case, it appears that the American president has walked into this war with his head held high, knowing perfectly well what he's getting into. Do you think this resembles more what the Americans did with Iraq in 2003?
Yes, but fitting the current order. That is, Trump is not necessarily a peace president, no matter how he tries to position himself as such. I think this is simply a shift in priorities. That is, throughout the 2000s, the United States focused a lot on the Middle East, and there, to a large extent, also to the benefit of Latin America, ignored that part of the world. But now that the world has become multipolar and the United States have to make some priorities, then restoring U.S. dominance in its own region is seen as, in its own backyard, is seen as being a key objective. So this is, I don't think Trump will shy away from using force within its own neighborhood. We've seen him being open to using force against Cuba. He talked after Venezuela that there could be something happening against Colombia. He has also said that he's open to strikes against Mexico. So there's no limits in Latin America. I think over the next months and years, we're going to see the U.S. pressure on Venezuela grow to a large extent. And this isn't only an issue about Trump, but it's the United States as well, looking for now reasserting this very imperial version of the Monroe Doctrine.
Interesting. It is the reassertion of the American Monroe Doctrine, which, of course, was brought into existence in the 19th century. Now, the fact that the Venezuelans sit on the biggest known oil reserves, and also the oil that is found in Venezuela is said to be substantially superior to the shale gas that the Americans keep digging up and talking about a lot. Is that what has now driven the American president to try and take over the Venezuelan oil reserves, because they are way better than what the Americans have in their own country?
No, I think definitely it's what the United States can get. And indeed, since the United States will likely be heading towards a massive economic crisis, I think it's important for them to get the largest oil reserves there is in the world under their own control in Venezuela. But it's not just what the Americans can get, but it's also what they can prevent other great powers from accessing, which is why the United States has focused on the whole idea that countries like China, Russia, Iran, any opponents of the United States or any great powers indeed should not be able to get access to these Venezuelan natural resources. So again, this is reasserting the U.S. sphere of influence in its own backyard, which means that these resources have to go to the U.S. and perhaps even more importantly, they can't be accessed by other great powers. So I think this is again why a diplomatic settlement in which Venezuela would open up more for American businesses is not sufficient for Washington. They need exclusive influence, and this is why I think war was seen as a preferred option.
I think that's a significant point that you make there, because a lot of the countries within South America were starting to do more and more business with the Chinese, and the Chinese companies were beginning to move in a pretty substantial manner in the Western Hemisphere, a place that the Americans would like to see only their own dominance. Do you think with what the Americans are now starting to do with Venezuela, this will warn off other South American nations from doing business with China and Russia?
It could be a stern warning. So when Trump comes with his next threats, again, keep in mind he also threatened last year Panama, in which he got some concessions and they withdrew a bit from the Belt and Road Initiative. I think you're going to see more of this, because the reality is in this new world, the United States can't really compete with China. So what are the options then? And I think the first approach was an economic war by cutting off access to high-tech chips, for example, to China. But the Chinese have shown that they're able to develop self-sufficiency and not depend on the US. So then, of course,
Professor, do continue to stay on with us. We have some updates that are coming in where the American president, who likes to put out messages on social media, has apparently put out a message. Jyotsna Kumar, you have the details. Go ahead.
Of course, we're waiting for any reaction from US, and there we have. Donald Trump has now come in with a statement. I'm just going to quote him right here. So Donald J. Trump says on his Truth Social, the United States of America has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. Now, that's a big statement that just came out. He adds here, this operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. And details to follow. Then there will be a news conference today at 11 a.m. local time at Mar-a-Lago. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. And there we have the statement coming in from Trump there. And it's interesting how he has now mentioned that President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. Now, this is interesting to see. We just saw a statement coming out from a Venezuelan government, but this is a big that we see from Trump right now. And we'll have to be we'll be waiting for this news conference at about 11 a.m. local time at Mar-a-Lago to see what kind of reactions or any kind of statement that comes out. But this is the first reaction that we have now got from Donald J. Trump, who has now announced that indeed this was U.S. strikes on Venezuela. Saleh.